Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I have a fun little plot twist for you, an interview with the author and editor behind one of this spring's hottest thrillers, Every Last Fear. Alex Finlay is the pseudonymous author. An Alabama native and Washington, D.C. based lawyer, he grew up traveling the world and was inspired to write the novel after vacationing in Tulum, Mexico with his family. Joseph Brosnan is a senior marketing manager at St. Martin's Press and the site manager for criminalelement.com. He acquired Alex's book and served as editor on the project, to which he brought sage guidance and vicious pen. That's a direct quote. Alex and Joe's collaboration, which began at a bar, because where else, has quickly caught fire. Every Last Fear has been named an Amazon Editor's Pick, an Indie Next Pick, and a Library Read Selection, as well as having been named either a Best or Most Anticipated Thriller of the Year by numerous media outlets, as you can see for yourselves. The premise is as compelling as it is compulsively readable. A family made infamous by a true crime documentary is found dead, leaving their surviving son to uncover the truth about their final days. Publishers Weekly enthused, Finlay imparts nuance via a prismatic narrative that jumps back and forth in time, examining both tragedies from multiple angles. Those who favor character-driven crime novels will find much to admire. I'd be willing to bet that's because the book derived from two admirable men who shared one bold vision, Alex Finlay and Joe Brosnan. Here's the story behind the story of Every Last Fear. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Central Bookem. I'm really excited tonight because I am in the company of two gentlemen, an author and an editor, which is kind of a twist on the familiar author interview. So we have Alex Finlay here, who is the author of Every Last Fear, which is really one of the buzziest books of the season. You hear about it everywhere. And also Mr. Joseph Brosnan, who is the senior marketing manager at St. Martin's Press. And also the content manager of criminalelement.com and editor of this book. So I think we're going to get some really, really interesting insights in this episode. And I wanted to start with you, Alex, because that is a pseudonym. It's not your true identity. So without revealing, too much about yourself, nothing that you're not comfortable saying, I was wondering if you can give us a bit of your background and just let us know sort of what led you to this book, this moment, and this new identity that you've created for yourself.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. The pseudonym, it's a lot more boring than the jacket description of me suggests. I'm a lawyer. I've written law-based books in the past. This was a way to kind of just write something totally different in the psychological thriller realm and do so without kind of any reader expectations, but also distinguish my other life. So I'd like to think it was something much more John le Carré, kind of. I was a spy by day, so I had to change my identity, but it's a little more pedestrian than that.
Sure. So lawyer, we'll draw our own conclusions. Dun, dun, dun.
He wants you to think.
Right? And so, Mr. Brosnan, who I am fortunate enough to write for at Criminal Element, I want to ask you, you've sort of worked an array of jobs in publishing. So can you tell us a little bit about what those jobs were and now, how you feel about this sort of your first big editorial gig?
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. I've been in publishing for about 7 years now in one form or another. First job was with Criminal Element, the site that I now manage. I was just brought in to be a contractor, just churning out the content that was written by other people, producing it for the web. But I got into that because it was a foot in the door. I wanted to be in publishing. It turned out to be one of the best things that could happen to me. I really immersed myself in crime fiction, thrillers, and read so much stuff that I had either always heard of, like the classics, like Agatha Christie or John le Carré. I hadn't ever read those prior to this job. And then it also got me reading what was current, hitting bestseller lists and all that sort of stuff. So a couple years later, after being a Criminal Element, a marketing job opened with Minotuar Books and St. Martin's Press, kind of working on a lot of thrillers and mysteries. And luckily, Criminal Element's owned by St. Martin's Press. So I moved literally 6 feet away to a different desk, and some things fell into place where the previous site manager left, and we needed someone to kind of take it over. It was just a 2-person team, so I've been kind of overseeing it now for 5 years.
Nice.
And editorially, it comes in about 2.5 years ago, maybe. I'd always been interested in the process. Kind of comes back from my college days. I always loved those days you did workshopping, working on a story, that sort of stuff, and kind of wanted to get to a point where I could do some of that kind of work in my career. Editorial was the obvious place to do that. And one of the benefits of being on Team Minotuar and getting to work really closely with the entire team, I developed good relationships with our editors, read a lot of books I had in on submission or before, whether they were thinking about buying it or even books I wasn't working on. I was just, offering reader notes, thoughts, suggestions, all with a master plan kind of to raise my hand at an opportune time and say, I'd like to do this a little bit myself. I have to give a shout out to Kelly Ragland, the editorial director of Minotuar. She said, yeah, when I pitched it to her, and it was about 2 years ago. And I was kind of they said, go, edit, acquire stuff, figure it out on your own, which was great. I just got to talk to a bunch of people. I knew agents from working as a marketer, so it wasn't starting at ground zero. And I'd been going to the Thriller Fests and the Voucher Cons and all those things, so I knew how to network. But it was kind of a lucky, fortuitous meeting, meeting Alex at the Thriller Fest, a booze-soaked Thriller Fest where everyone does their duties and then goes to the bar afterwards. You kind of just speed date almost. And we hit it off. We were talking. He was telling me about a book he was working on. Hadn't written much of it yet, but it was this idea that kind of had stuck out to him. And plotting and talking about it. And I was like, I'm going to shoot my shot. I'd like to read this when it's ready. So I guess it was, but fast forward some months later, I got an email from Alex's agent, Lisa, and there was about 100 pages or so of the book written. And it was good. It was, that's why we're here. Character driven, and the opening chapter words, it just takes a lot of courage to kill off a bunch of kids and adults on the first page. And I love that kind of stuff. I love when storytelling surprises you. And that's what this did. And I was curious about how, were they really dead? There's no way they could be dead. It's that kind of book. Those books don't work, but this book's working. And it left off at such a tease point that I needed to know what happened. So I passed it around internally. Same reactions. It was enthusiastic right off the bat. And I bought 2 books with having read 100 pages. It was kind of an odd deal, but I gambled on them. Paid off so far, I'd say. And I plan to work with Alex for a long time. It's been great.
It's awesome. So you mentioned a good 100 pages and a really good stopping point. But let me ask you, so, Joe mentioned the bar, and I know in the acknowledgments section of the book, I love acknowledgments. I feel like a book isn't complete until you've actually read them. But you do mention sort of that fortuitous meeting in a bar. So can you sort of tell us your recollections, of that meeting and sort of how you'd been thinking of this story and why Joe seemed to be the right person to hook up with to sort of bring it further?
Yeah, definitely. I remember it really well. I go to Thriller Fest every year. I'm a big advocate for aspiring writers to go to the conference. Hopefully there'll be a live one next year. And a lot of the mingling happens at the bar. And I had met Joe previously before our conversation, but I had gone on this spring break trip with my family to Tulum, Mexico. And anyone who hasn't read the book, the story opens with the line, they found the bodies on a Tuesday. And it opens with basically the reader learning that the 2 parents and 2 of their children are found dead in Tulum, Mexico vacation rental in what seems to be a gas leak or some mysterious type of a freak accident. And I'd gotten the idea a couple months before Thriller Fest when I was actually in Tulum in this, kind of off the beaten path hotel for me, it was kind of like in the jungle. It was an eco hotel. I never stayed in like a real hotel like that was like totally isolated. I was there one night in the dark, and my family's kind of passed out. We've been watching crime, true crime shows, and the idea just is like, well, what if something happened to us here? What would my oldest son, who was away at NYU, do? We're in another country. What would happen? And I tapped out kind of what became the prologue of the book. And so I had the idea to do that, and had the idea to tell the story through the protagonist, who's this college student, kind of irresponsible kid, but tell the rest of the story through each of the deceased family members' perspectives in the days leading up to their ultimate fate. And so it was a challenge. The idea was, unique, to kill off nearly everybody up front, and then have the reader still feel invested enough to want to understand what happened, and to see the clues from each deceased character's perspective. And so I recall being, Joe saying, "What are you working on?" And we were just having drinks, being in a casual type conversation, talking about life and his job and my job and writing. And he was super enthusiastic about the idea. He's like, "This is unique. It doesn't sound like the everyday thriller. And, I want to hear more about it." And so we talked about it. And after I got to a point with my agent when we thought we had a really strong opening, she was going to pitch a partial, which is pretty rare. She felt that strongly about it. And it landed on Joe's desk, and then here we are. So that's kind of the unusual path to publication, but it made it, the fact that it landed with the guy who was so encouraging of me to pursue it and to move forward with, was really gratifying. And he then elevated the book, I will say, to a different level.
Nice.
Not to be nice to Joe, which is
it's recorded.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm going to edit some of this out. I don't want to.
That's right. We can talk separately. I'm willing to edit for a price. So first, I have to say I'm really impressed that both of you remember, a conversation at a bar so well. Kudos to you. So actually, I'm not going to ask you to step into the elevator and pitch us the book, because you just really gave us the premise very succinctly, which is excellent. And I want to ask you, Joe, because in working, in marketing, one, for people who aren't really familiar with what marketing is, if you can give us some quick insight into that, but also, thinking of pitching a book and a premise and really boiling a book down to its essential elements, can you talk about how important it is to be able to do that to effectively market a book like this?
Yeah, and I think something I try to bring to the editorial process that is a bit unique is that marketing kind of hat I'm always wearing. I'm thinking about how those last 3 months before publication are going to look, because there's so many hurdles on the way that don't come up until so much closer to your pub date, so far after a book's acquired and edited. So it was kind of thinking, I think one of the big things I pushed for early on were putting in the script excerpts from the true crime documentary. A lot of that information was in the book, already told through normal type of flashback chapters, but I think the screenplay moves it along a little quicker, lets you strip some of that extra packing that has to go into a scene. And I think it was a great way to show, not tell. And I also, in college, I studied film writing, so it was a fun way to kind of put that hat back on. And Alex did such a good job with the script. We've had people comment and ask if it's actually being made. It's just it felt like a natural way to enhance a story. So that was something. And then I knew if we had script, that means it's easy to record voiceover. It's easy to record the audiobook and take those clips from it. It's easy to kind of build ourselves these tools that will come in really handy down the line. So it's benefited us in more ways than one. Also, the cover took forever to land on. We went through so many iterations, and I really wanted something that we were always talking about SEO, search engine optimization, and how your book looks as a thumbnail on an Amazon or any e-retailer. And I wanted big type. I wanted like a clear cover. I didn't want this to look like every other book in the thriller shelves, and our design team or our team just killed it. I think we've seen so many fun people on Instagram like recreating the strings and the threads and putting all their crime boards up, and it's been a lot of fun. So I guess that's some of the way marketing works. I mean, it's like thinking creatively and how you can kind of get some of your work done. But then a marketer's job is I like to call it almost project management. So most of the time, you're working on social media. Some days you're working on bookseller outreach. Some days, and you're working with bloggers. You're working with Amazon. All the same goals of trying to get people to open your emails or be interested in your book. So you really have to start honing your pitches. You really start to realize what works, what subject lines are good. And also with Criminal Element, I'm on the other end of that. I'm always getting pitched by other publishers for their books. So I really do get to see so many different ways in which the puzzle pieces fit together. So to add the like experience of the infancy of a book, of the negotiations, the like rearranging chapters, cutting characters, all that stuff, adding that to the like late game stuff that I already knew, it's been fun.
Awesome. Wow, so you're sort of like one-stop shopping. Like, you did good, Alec. You landed in the right place.
I will say I did not do the marketing on this book, separation of church and state, but we had a couple people working on the marketing side. We had a publicist who were doing all of the showy lifting at the end, getting him on all those lists and Instagram feeds. I can't take that credit.
Well, they did a nice job, and it's one of those books, it shows up and you just have to read it because it looks so good. And then you realize that it's made the best of list on like every single thing. I mean, you look at your website and there's just a list, a ridiculous list. So, kudos on that. So let me ask you, so you guys, obviously met in sort of an unconventional way, but you had a relationship a bit before the book was acquired. So I don't know if you would just call it a friendship or an acquaintanceship, but let me ask you, Alex, when you're working with somebody that you already know and you sort of have a relationship with, do you find that makes the editorial process easier, more complicated because of the investment in that relationship, or is there sort of a combination of the two?
I think ultimately it's easier. I always worry that I cross the line because I feel like Joe is my editor, but also my friend. And so I battle sometimes with myself, like, well, would I be bothering him with this text right now if he were just the professional editor? But I think at the end of the day, it's really helped the process because it's taken a lot of the mystery out of publishing to me. I trust him to I trust his judgment immensely. I trust his editorial judgment. I mean, he talks a lot about marketing, but he's got a natural gift for editing. And some of the best aspects of the book, the screenplay editions, which I was very skeptical about, were all his ideas. His instincts of who to cut, who to keep, were just spot on. And so I was questioning him at first, kind of in a fun way, and now I just kind of listen to what he says. So I wouldn't say we were close friends beforehand. We were kind of like, we'd say hello, we talk, casually. But over this process, because it came about in such a weird way, I felt like I think have a really tight relationship. I hope he trusts me the way I trust him. But I definitely think that it enhanced the book, both the content of the book, but also how I thought about the book being released. I mean, we talked about the covers. I was married to a particular cover that we did not use, and he spent many hours that I don't think any other editor would have spent because of our relationship, kind of walking me through it. And he turned out to be right. And if you go on, at the time, 6 months before the book came out, you couldn't go on Instagram without seeing this cover somewhere. And it was, really his vision implemented by Stephen, Martin, and Kayla, the great people on the team who just kind of ran with it. And so overall, a lot of my writer friends are really jealous when I talk about my relationship with Joe but also the experience of having somebody who is not just editorially savvy, but marketing savvy.
Sure. And shout out to Kayla, who coordinated this interview for us. Thank you, Kayla. So let me ask you, Joe, before we move on, do you have any, thoughts on that, working with somebody who you already sort of know on a semi-personal level versus somebody who's a bit more at a distance?
Yeah, it was definitely, you could feel the relationship we had just growing as this process went on. I mean, we're talking this book, we first talked about it July 2018, I think it was, that Thriller Fest. So, I mean, we've been on the grind for a while together. And, there was talking at the signing of the contract, there was talking at the first submission, the edits, the screenplay, the cover, the marketing plan, the how do we handle the pseudonym plan, just everything. And it really showed me how many conversations, you're expected to have as an editor. And I was definitely learning on the fly. So it felt super reaffirming to know I was learning on the fly with Alex, because I knew we were good. He wasn't doubting me, and we talked through whatever we had. And now as I move on to working with additional authors, who you're not naturally going to have this type of relationship with every one of them, it's prepped me in a way to just know how I need to handle my business and the best way to deliver things. And so nothing but great things to say on how this played out and how it's going to make our lives easier for the next book and the next book.
Nice. But I bet you he doesn't share his number and text information with them. I have to deal with me.
No comment.
Yes, he's asserting the Fifth Amendment. So let me ask you too, Alex. So writers, and I think especially newer writers, I think often struggle with, what editorial feedback to take versus when to sort of stick to their own initial instincts. So can you talk a little bit about, how you decided, and this is just generally, we'll get into it a little bit more specifically in a minute, but just generally, what was your sort of philosophy in deciding what feedback to take from Joe versus what you had envisioned yourself and wanted to follow through on in that exact kind of way?
Yeah, and I think it's the one of the good things about being a lawyer is that when you write briefs, it's often a little bit of a collaborative process, and you have to get used to people editing your work, and you have to let go of the ego and the stubbornness and all those things that I think that some newer writers who haven't gone through that process takes a little while to develop. And so I think it was a little easier for me to try to hear other people's perspectives. The great thing about Joe is I really didn't think we had any disagreements about editorial. I tended to think his instincts were spot on. I think that his work on Criminal Element and being so immersed in the thriller genre just give him an edge up to much more than me on certain things. And so I don't recall a time when we really had any loggerheads about any specific issues. I was skeptical about, we talked about people who haven't read the book. The novel is, as I mentioned, about this family who died, but the family dynamic is that one of the family members 7 years prior, when he was a teenager, was convicted of killing his girlfriend, and these become a few years later, Netflix did a documentary about his case and suggests he's innocent. So this family's kind of become part of the national conversation. And so Joe's during the as we're developing the manuscript, he suggested, well, let's put little excerpts of the transcript from the true crime documentary. And I already thought, I got a lot going on. I've got 4 different perspectives. I got before and after, and I just do we really need to add something else? And he said, let's give it a try in his way, kind of diplomatic way. Let's do a couple, put them in, and see how it goes. And I really do think that they allowed me to cut a lot from the actual storyline, because I could give the reader information through these little snippets that I was doing a lot of pages on elsewhere. So I thought at the end of the day, it turned out to be a very good idea, even though it does add to the complexity of the story. But overall, I think that it's the challenge of every writer. It's like, who do I listen to? At the end of the day, I was going with my instincts, but I want to listen to professionals who I have faith in, and I was in good hands. So I don't think I'd say I took 95% of his proposed suggestions.
Wow. Hopefully, you don't expect that to be the norm, Joe.
No, I'm not expecting that. But I do think what excites me about editing is that idea of like saying, this is really great. What if we just change this? Or what if we get in here instead of here, or cut it off there? Like just asking yourself. And I only bring 5% of those questions to Alex, to the author, because most of it's like, no, actually that will give you issues here, or you can't do that for this reason, or scratch that. This is just a good idea the way it is. But I'm always just kind of like poking somewhere and seeing what happens somewhere else. And the screenplay was, I think, the big idea for this one that I proposed, but all the screenplay did was replace some chapters. This book was quite ready to publish, even if we had never done that. I didn't have to worry about handling all the different timelines and keeping track of it, because Alex had done that in the draft. It was all pretty tight. I remember talking to our like copy editing and production editing team, whose job is kind of track continuity, and they're like, it's surprisingly tight. Like he had it all down. And that seems immensely harder to me than adding some script pages.
Sure.
And it was actually like kind of the way I was just organizing chapters, make sure we were in an order I liked, was just like I wrote a quick summary, one index card per chapter, just to make sure I liked how it read. And I imagined a board, and like the cover is almost that inside joke to me, because it's like there are so many threads in this book, and it was fun to see how they played out.
Sure. And so let me ask you, as you're sort of moving into other editorial projects too, I know, as the editor, you sort of want to maintain the integrity of the author's vision, but you find ways that you might be able to enhance it. So, how do you determine what points to really push versus what, you might have a little issue with, but you can let
I think that kind of conversation and relationship has to just be built kind of right off the bat. And make it clear to the person you're talking to that, like, I'm not saying everything I'm suggesting needs to be done, but I'm not suggesting anything that I think is a bad idea. And let's have a conversation about each one of them and get on the same page. And I don't have a movable feet, and I hope that the person I'm editing, the writer that I'm working with, doesn't either. And usually there's a middle ground to find. I'm working on another book right now that was more of me suggesting things that didn't get accepted necessarily. And I think that's fine. I think if you can tell me a good reason why something needs to stay, that's all the proof that what you've done is right. But if I kind of check the foundation and you let it crumble quickly, it was weak for a reason. Let's find out how to strengthen it.
Sure. All right. So I thought, if you don't mind, I might pull out a couple specific elements of the book, not spoilery, but just a little bit more specific than maybe we've been talking. And if you can tell us, Alex, just a little bit about how you think they work in the book, how they enhance the plot. And then if either of you have thoughts about how that, developed further in the course of the editorial process, that would be great. But I did want to mention one of my favorite characters in the book, who I think could, easily be a carryover character, is the special agent, Sarah Keller, who's sort of like a co-protagonist with Matt Pine. And I love too that, her and her husband, they sort of defy common gender stereotypes. So I was wondering if you can talk about her character and how she was developed throughout the process.
Yeah, no, great. I'm glad you said that about Sarah Keller, because she's going to be a lead in the next book. And so we've seen a lot of good reader reaction to Keller. I think at the end of the day, the reason for that is that uh, she's no nonsense. She's great at her job, but really at the end of the day, she's super decent and super kind, but still very effective. And I think like right now, there's something about that that's kind of appealing to people. Just somebody who's great at what they do, does it in a way that is inherently decent. And as far as her relationship with her husband, I think for me it was nice to have I think there's a million great domestic thrillers out there, and a lot of them involve conflict between husbands and wives, or significant others. And I just thought it was nice to have this kind of really, sturdy relationship and mutually supportive kind of couple that you just kind of like. And so that for me is what is the heart of the Keller and her husband Bob dynamic.
Sure. And did you have anything to add to that, Joe, or you can tell me to just move on if not, either way?
I guess all I'll say is that going into the book for the first time reading it and like realizing we are going to have a repeating like law enforcement character, I was like unsure at first because I found, the family character so compelling and I needed to know everything about that storyline that I was concerned you were going to have some chapters repeated. When you get, everyone has the books where there's a point of view character, you just like, I wish this wasn't that person's chapter right now. I'm going to stop reading or I'm going to skip. And I was concerned that would happen with Keller, and it never did for me. I thought she was not only like great as a character, so much that we, made it a plan to bring her back for the next book, but also that like she was whole and more than just a badge and human. And, she makes a mistake or two, but not in that groaning way where you, the reader, are mad that you're a character whose head you're in is making mistakes that you could not make and might be better than. I think you lose readers there. I lose interest on books like that. So I think this was kind of like a perfect tone that Alex took with Keller.
Sure. And I'll skip over this next point because you sort of talked about, the alternating time frames and perspectives and even the different storytelling constructs with the transcripts, which are kind of a different type of writing. But I will say, as a reader, I was really impressed with that because there's so much sort of elasticity to it that it was nice to read something that was that tight, but that varied. So it was interesting for me to hear, how you were able to develop that. But another thing I wanted to ask you about, and you touched on this a little bit, but I think maybe my favorite part of this book, and it was surprising to me because it's not what I expected, but really the development of, the deceased members of the Pine family is very dynamic, multi-textured characters because, I think as Joe said before, they're dead on page 1, and yet they become, very central characters. And despite the tragedy of what happens to them, they sort of have their opportunity to get their own redemption. So can you talk a little bit about developing their characters throughout the book, even though they're sort of already in the past tense?
Sure. And that was the challenge. I mean, I think this is a testament to Joe's kind of encouragement to continue, because I think when I talked to Joe initially, I had written the prologue, which kind of shows what happens. And I was just starting to do the idea of writing each family member's perspective, as the deceased. And I think many people would say, don't even bother, nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to want to read 350 pages of people they know are dead. They're just not going to want to do that. And I think Joe's encouragement of if we can not only be a unique way to tell a story to give readers clues of what happened through these alternative perspectives, but make you really care, then there's something we can do something with this. And that's what I went into it when I wrote those 100 pages was, what can I do? And that's the challenge of a writer. It's like, the main, you can have the greatest plot in the world, if people don't care about the characters, the book's not going to do well. And so I just, that was my real focus of trying to, make you want to keep reading about people that's going to happen. And for me, it was like drawing on things in my own life, from ideas I had about family, but also the fact that to try and somehow make this tragedy mean something at the end. To have them kind of be split apart, but at the end, no matter what happens, they kind of have a family resolution, and they kind of are at peace with this really dysfunctional family in a lot of ways.
Sure. Joe?
Yeah, I think when I had read those 100 pages or so, you had that prologue, memorable, and then you had a lot of Matt in current day picking up the pieces, finding out the news. We saw a couple of snippets of the dad and of Keller, also present day. And you could see the breadcrumbs were starting to be laid, but it was just like, I wanted to be explicit in that this book needs to have that family in it, because I think you could break some hearts by the end of it. And I think that's a book, you can evoke that emotion, you've done your job. And he did.
Sure. And sort of follow up on something that you said, Alex, I wanted to ask you too, sort of looking at a family tragedy and the dynamics of a family tragedy and how people are affected sort of as a whole family unit, but also individually. Can you talk, a little bit about how we get to see the impact on, Danny's incarceration for a crime that he may or may not have committed, and how that affects the other members of his family in very profound but sort of different ways?
Yeah, and I think that's, true crime shows now have become kind of a mainstay. Serial, Making a Murderer, and these really high quality productions. And when I was writing the book, I was thinking about, what happens to, when the cameras stop, or what happens to the people in the aftermath, and the towns in the aftermath. And you get some of that in some of these shows. But really to kind of telescope in on the family. We all have families. We all have family issues, and we all have kind of the uncle who's grown if they're coming to the holiday meal, or the cousin who's a train wreck, or and brothers and sisters have competitive issues. And so I just thought about that's a regular family. Throw in a grenade of having not only a brother, the family star, the football star, the local hero, the dad's favorite, probably, be convicted. What would that do to an average family? And how can you do something with that to make it kind of interesting, but also reach a point of resolution, so people feel like, even in this family, with all this crap going on, at the end of the day, they were still a family. They still loved each other. They still supported each other, and they found peace in them. So it was a challenge, and that's probably the hardest part of the book.
And so are you like the buffer, Joe? Like, keep going. You can do this. You're almost at the point.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think from the first pages you read, you knew we had this story he had it down, and it was just a matter of pulling the right strings at the right time. So I was just cheering along, kind of nudging some strings sometimes, and it worked.
Awesome. All right, so I will wrap it up shortly. Just a couple more questions, if you don't mind. But I wanted to ask you, Alex, so uncertain times, you're launching this book in a pandemic, which isn't necessarily the ideal situation or the dream, when you're putting your book out into the world. So can you talk a little bit about the, emotional and logistical challenges of that, but also how the challenge sort of gives room for creativity and sort of outside the box thinking?
Sure. I mean, the book was done before the pandemic, largely. We continued to, but it was largely, mostly where it is now, but with would go and we continue to edit. So, but I'll say, the thing about the pandemic is this is not the ideal world to launch a book. But the pandemic also kind of makes you take stock and realize there are bigger things in life, and people are healthy, and my family is fine. And frankly, I just felt confidence in Joe, and we didn't even talk about pushing the release date because I thought it would work out. I thought we would find readers, and I think we have. And so I didn't really have a lot of stress that way, as you might expect. It's been different doing events via Zoom and those kind of things. You kind of hope to go to bookstores and do, be an author and do those kind of things. But at the end of the day, it's been a good experience. I'm looking forward to the world opening up like everybody else, but I'm taking it in stride. Like, I have this book that I did the best I could. I poured my heart into. It's out in the world. People have avenues to get it, and I have a team I trust. And by next book, we'll be, hopefully visiting in person, meeting at the bar, and talking about the next one.
Nice. And so, similar question to you, Joe. Working in marketing, obviously things are ever changing. So, what have the challenges been personally, and sort of the opportunities for sort of more creative thinking, and how do you think that what do you think might be the long-term effects of this on publishing once we sort of reach a new normal, whatever that is?
Yeah, I think, as Alex said, it wasn't the ideal time to put out a book, but a pandemic's not an ideal time to do anything, it feels like. So, you figure it out. And first month or two of the pandemic, a year ago now, that was that time. Everyone was figuring everything out. We had to, on the fly adapt the entire industry to digital and remote. And I felt like I had a lot of calls with my authors who I work in marketing for, like, here's what Zoom is, and here's how Facebook Live works, and here's like, we really got to double down on social media because it's the only way you're going to really talk to your fans. But the infrastructure was there, just a matter of going towards it. So, and I think that's kind of what's here to stay too. I think Zoom book club events, I think the one thing holding the entire world back was that most people didn't know how to do it, right? And overnight, almost everyone learned what it was, how to do it, and got set up for it. So now there's no hurdles to jump. Everyone knows how to RSVP and sign up and tune in and comment and be engaged. And I think, there will certainly be in-person events and bookstore events and all these things. Everyone can't wait for that stuff, but this allows you to do things, maybe after the week of publication. It allows you to hit stores you would have never hit. And we're able to work with authors we have overseas in US stores in ways that we never could before. So I think all that's really great. We're seeing a lot more people read early copies digitally, like through NetGallery or Edelweiss. And I think that's a welcome change for us. Less shipping costs, one, but just like, it's more data in that for us, the marketer. We know who, is reading through a book. I don't think that's going anywhere. So I think the changes that we were forced to make, some of them will be good ones. I know for myself, I can't wait to get back into the office. I'm tired of working from my apartment, but I think, we persevered, the industry did. And it wasn't as big of a nightmare launching this book as we feared it could be when this whole thing started. So.
They talk about every last fear. All right, final question, gentlemen. You mentioned that there is going to be a book 2, which I'm sure a lot of people will be very happy to hear. Can you just give us a little teaser of what that might be? Are you allowed to? Joe's like, no. Say
no, that's all you.
I should pitch this to Joe because I still haven't worked out my elevator pitch of the next book, but let me give it a shot. Keller is a character. The premise of the book is that on New Year's Eve, 1999, the Y2K dilemma being a kind of big deal in the country. None of the problems of Y2K happened, but in a small town Blockbuster Video, a group of teenagers who work there are kind of marched into the break room and murdered the employees. 15 years later, in the same town, they never catch the killer. They have a suspect and he's on the run, and he's kind of disappeared. A teenage kid. 15 years later, in the same town, a similar incident happens at an ice cream store. And Agent Keller is kind of brought in to examine whether there's the person they believe is the perpetrator for the 1999 crime is involved in the latest incident. And it's kind of an intersection of lives. So Agent Keller, who's looking into this unlikely connection to the crime, the brother of the fugitive, who's on the run, who's kind of lived his life with this infamous brother, and one of the surviving victims from the first crime. And so it's kind of a story about people who were damaged by tragedy, find their meaning in life, but a mystery and a twisty thriller with Keller trying to kind of about.
Well, it's a good premise, I have to say.
Well done. Well done.
I know, off the cuff, that was really, really good. Threw down the gauntlet. So obviously, it sounds like you're on board for book 2, Joe, but is there, anything else you have upcoming that you're particularly excited about, or anything that you're looking forward to doing now that you've sort of broached the editorial aspect of things?
Yeah, the other book I'm currently editing, it'll be coming out around this time next year, is a debut mystery titled Pay Dirt Road by Samantha Jane Allen. The book is also the winner of the 2019 Tony Hillerman Prize, which Minotuar presents once a year to a debut novel set in the American Southwest. So this it's fantastic. It's one of those books you can't really believe it's a debut, but it's set in small town Texas. There's my cat. Yeah. Set in a small Texas town, kind of like a Friday Night Lights vibe, and someone goes missing, and we have our main character is a recent graduate woman who's moved back home, kind of not sure where her life's going, and her family runs a private investigation business. So she kind of starts clerking for them, but then kind of has a connection to the person who was missing, and it pulls her in, and then she realizes she's really good at it. It's just one of those set towns that it feels lived in the moment you open the book, and I'm really excited about that one. Other than that, reading submissions, trying to get more, but also got plenty of marketing to do, and
of course,
all to run. So
lots of hats. Many hats. All right, I have one final question for you, Alex, actually, because I think we all missed the bar. Can you tell us what you're drinking? Because it looks quite delightful.
I'm embarrassed to tell this because it reveals my sad upbringing, but it is vodka with kombucha. So, sorry, it's a weird drink, but I like it.
Good to me. All right, well, thank you, gentlemen. This was a real pleasure for me. I just want to encourage everybody to pick up Every Last Fear, Alex Finlay. If you haven't read it yet, you want to, you need to, you'll do it, right? Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. It was good chatting with you.
Great chatting with you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, John. This was great.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.